The Fujifilm X100V has probably been the most talked about camera for the past year or two, mainly due to the hipster hype that happened on the myriads of social media that resulted in the camera increasing to a price above retail on the secondary market, and that still holds true today. One can argue that the X100V has actually been an underrated camera prior to the hype. Let's initiate the review with some specs. The sensor is an APS-C X-Trans CMOS version 4 and it consists of 26.1 megapixels. It's a fixed lens type system, meaning that you're stuck with the 23mm lens, which is 35mm in full frame equivalency, which for some can be extremely restrictive and for other people be surprisingly freeing. The lens has an aperture of f/2 and has a leaf shutter. The camera has a built-in ND16 filter which will give you about 4 stops and an inbuilt flash. It is weather sealed, but you need a weather sealed kit, which I will get back to a bit later. It has a retail price of $1,400. You can get it in a black model or a silver model. One of the reasons people tend to favor Fuji is the colors. JPEGs out of the camera are print and social media ready. The classic negative has been my absolute favorite, which I've used extensively for a lot of street photography. For me, it seems that it has a nice subdued green and magenta shift to it, in a very pleasant way with a earthy and warm tone to it. I'm not 100% sure if that's the right way to explain it, but that's how it feels to me. The X100V has other profiles as well, like Provia, which is the standard profile, Astia, which gives you soft contrasts and a subtle look, Classic Chrome, which is another great color profile. It gives you a softer look but enhances the contrast in the shadows. Eterna, which is similar to Astia and Classic Chrome, is recognized as their cinematic look, almost like the lighter version of a log profile. And Across, which is one of their black and white profiles. I want to say one thing though. The first time I used the Fuji camera, I could not believe how great the photos looked immediately out of the camera compared to a Panasonic gear. So the notion that Fuji has great colors with JPEGs is a statement that I concur with. You can still edit the JPEGs afterwards, but if you want more flexibility, you can choose to shoot in RAW and JPEG simultaneously. The X100V has some cool and exciting settings you can alter for your JPEGs. These gives you a flexibility in terms of look and most importantly a baked-in experience that allows for you to increase the shooting experience and solely focus on exposure, composition and capturing the moment. Some of the effects you can add is grain effect, color chrome effect and color chrome effect blue. I sometimes just max out everything and do a slight white balance shift to increase the tone to a specific color and thereby getting some rather interesting results. You can also change the clarity setting. The clarity is essentially changing the definition of objects in your photos to make them pop out more. In my experience though, when you increase the clarity, it does seem to add a bit of a lag when you take photos. Just bear that in mind. Being able to get these types of results without doing anything in post is incredible, and this is not something that only the X100V can do. This is something that a lot of the Fujifilm's cameras can do. I have watched some videos on leaf shutter and I think it's an interesting concept, and I love the fact that they have chosen a leaf shutter for this camera. It has been possible to incorporate because of the fixed lens structure, and I feel like you get the sense of having something rare and unique in your possession. There is some advantages to using a leaf shutter mechanism. The shutter is constructed in a leaf-like structure that moves from the center and then outwards, which means that it removes the curtains a lot faster than a focal plane shutter, which makes it ideal in situations where you want to use an external flash. I am not too experienced in using flashes, so I can't necessarily comment too much on how much of a difference it makes, but it makes a slight difference. And another advantage is how silent it is, which is great for any type of photography really, because it makes the camera less intrusive and less noticeable. It also produces less shakiness, which is great to keep the camera steady to eliminate any possible motion blur. So all these theoretical concepts are factually correct. How much I personally have gained from this, I can't really say. I think an expert who truly understands the technical marvels of a leaf shutter would love something like this, but these overall should give you a better experience. It can shoot 8-bit 4K internally, which is fine. I think for its size and for what the camera is intended for, you're not really buying it for its video capabilities. As you can see from this footage, it's pretty all over the place. I am exaggerating a bit of course, but it's due to the fact that it does not have IBIS. I am so used to having IBIS with my Panasonic cameras and the X-T4 and the X-H2S that I think for the way I shoot video I genuinely need it, because everything I shoot is pretty much handheld. The X100V without IBIS is fine if we could have added a lens with optical image stabilization, but with a fixed lens, for obvious reasons, that's impossible. If you rig this camera up, you should be able to get some pretty nice footage out of the camera, but you're not buying it for the video capabilities, you're buying it for the photo experience. Buttons and ergonomics. I think Fuji has taken 2 steps ahead and 1 step back, but hear me out. The buttons on the top of the camera truly encapsulate analog emotions. They have redesigned the ISO shutter button from the X100F, whereas when you pull the dial upwards to change the ISO, it will remain in that ISO mode, whereas with the X100F, you have to keep a constant pressure upwards, otherwise the dial will sink down to the shutter mode again. With the X100F, it was always stressful to keep the ISO button up, so this is a welcoming design touch. Next to the ISO shutter dial, there is an exposure compensation dial and a custom button. On the front, you have a focus mode switcher and a switcher for changing the viewfinder from an electronic viewfinder to an optical viewfinder. There is also a small grip, which does help with ergonomics, and honestly I prefer to use the camera this way, but if ergonomics is your top priority, you can buy a cheap third-party grip on Amazon. But I love the feeling of the leather, and I feel it would just add too much bulk to the camera with a grip. But for extensive shoots, it's probably a good idea with an add-on grip. On the back, there is a touchscreen with a resolution of 1.62 million dots. It's responsive and fine to view your photos and framing the shot. They have upgraded the screen from the X100F, so now you can pull out the screen towards you. And I think for taking photos, these are actually the best types of screens compared to the vertical tilt ones. The controversial design choice was them removing the D-pad and then replacing it with a joystick, and usually I would find these controversial changes disruptive in a negative way, but for some reason the joystick is not that bad. For some reason it did not alter my perception of the camera at all. I think Fuji wanted to create this super simple photo experience, and so far the missing D-pad has not disrupted a pleasant photo experience for me. The X100V completes the retro feel, look and experience with an analog viewfinder, which you can turn on by swiveling this lever on the front, which will change it from an EVF to an OVF. I think a lot of people who has not experienced an OVF will find this feature rather gimmicky. I definitely do understand that sentiment because I felt the exact same way, but after experiencing it myself, I do understand the nostalgia surrounded by it. And not being able to see exactly how the exposure is changing when you change the settings can actually help you increase your sense of judging the exposure a bit better. So that is one positive of the OVF, I guess. The build quality is great. It feels solid in the hand and it has some weight to it. I cannot comment on whether this is on par with something of a Leica Q2, but in my experience, I've been more than satisfied. There is some leather across the body of the camera for a lovely, comfortable touch and grip. The anodized metal on the top of the camera to give it a matte black finish, which has a subtle soft touch to it. It does not have the biggest grip, but it's fine. The buttons feels nice and sturdy and does not feel cheap at all. The camera looks solid and feels solid. I don't think you'll be disappointed with the quality, even though Fuji reportedly has seen a slight decrease in production quality with the newer cameras. But I don't know whether this is affecting the X100V for the future production or not. Some other things, it has one SD card slot and it uses the MPW126 battery, which is graded for 350 photos with the X100V. You can charge the battery directly in the camera, but you can get external chargers on Amazon as well. I'm not sure yet whether I prefer external chargers or in-camera charging, but the convenience of being able to charge with a USB-C cable is pretty cool. In order to take advantage of weather sealing, you need a filter on the lens. The one I can highly recommend, which I've also linked in the description, is this one from Nisi. It costs about $40. It's great quality, I don't see any degradation in sharpness or any sort of color casting. It's convenient and super intuitive. It removes any obstacle with you fiddling with caps. It allows for you to just turn on the camera and shoot. Again, super convenient and intuitive. You can also customize the camera with these soft shutters, which you can screw on the shutter button. And you can get it in different colors and shapes. The Nisi filter and these soft shutters I've linked down in the description. Check it out. It uses face detect and I have no discernible issues with it. It separates objects and people very well. For the past 3 years, I think pretty much any camera brand's autofocus will work for you for your photography. As long as it's not a fast moving object, then you're probably better off with a Sony or a Canon or maybe even an X-H2S. The manual focus is a bit tedious, but that's by the design of having such a small lens. The focus wheel is small. and it just gets more bothersome if you have something attached to it in front of the lens. Luckily, the autofocus is more than adequate for your street photography and your portraits. The lens exhibits great quality all the way down to f2. They have re-engineered this lens from the previous X100F, which lacked sharpness wide open, while the X100V has solved those issues and it's very sharp wide open at f2.0, which is great because you cannot change the lens and you want to be able to use that lens wide open to gain more light and bokeh. That bokeh is subtle and fine, and one of the great things about this lens is the minimum focus distance, and you can get fairly close, thereby having a lens with semi-macro capabilities, which also allows for more bokeh if you think about it. GXAce has an incredible channel on YouTube explaining that at high shutter speed, the leaf shutter are not removed fast enough, which gives a weird feathering effect to the bokeh. I just wanted to mention it because I've not noticed it too much myself, but I'm usually also using the inbuilt ND if there's too much light. It has an aperture ring, which is fine. I think people's overall assessment is that it's a little bit cumbersome, but it has these small handles you can use to alter it. I think having an aperture ring on the lens has definitely become a part of the Fuji experience, so I guess it's part of their philosophy and kind of a necessary part of their DNA. The X100V has an inbuilt ND16 filter, which should give you 4 stops of decrease in light. For the people that don't know what an ND filter is, I explain it to you here. In video, in order for you to get smooth motion blur, you need to shoot with lower shutter speeds, which in daylight can be a problem, because low shutter speed will introduce a lot of light, and it's only so low the ISO can go, especially in a log profile. So to combat this issue, you put an ND filter in front of the lens to stop the light. The same goes for photography. The highest shutter speed is 4000 on the X100V and the lowest ISO is 160, which is not low enough at times. If you want to introduce bokeh into your image, you have to take advantage of the very sharp f2.0 lens. Shooting at f2.0 in broad daylight will overexpose your image at times, even if you set the shutter speed at 4000 and the ISO at 160. In most situations, you will put an ND filter in front of the lens to stop the light. In this scenario, they've built the ND filter into the camera you can turn on. So the ND filter built into the X100V can stop 4 stops of light. So in other conversions, it would be like turning the shutter speed from 4000 to 16,000. Having an ND filter is such a beautiful touch by Fuji. It truly eliminates so many elements when you want to have a carefree shootout. And if you want more stops of light, you can always add another ND filter in front of the lens. So how do you actually turn on the ND filter in the X100V? It's actually pretty simple. Press the menu button and then scroll down to the camera icon, which is the shooting settings. And on the bottom of page 2, you find the ND filter settings. And when you look through the lens, you can see the ND filter being applied and when it's not applied. You can get the camera in silver or black. I have broken my mind to understand which color makes most sense. A lot of people would say this is a shallow way of looking at cameras, but I don't think it is. You as a consumer and a photographer are attracted to its aesthetics. It's literally beautiful, and not a lot of cameras can claim that statement. It makes you engage with it more. I have owned the silver version and now own the black version, and I was 100% sure silver cameras was the way to go, at least for these retro cameras. But after owning the black version, I'm not so sure anymore. The silver version is a bit more noticeable, whereas the black version is a bit more discreet. You cannot go wrong with either, they're both beautiful cameras. I mean, they are the same camera. If I really had to choose for this specific camera with the optical viewfinder and the retro design look, I might still go with the silver version, but again, I'm not 100% sure. I have owned the GX9. I do miss it at times, mainly because I had all the lenses for it and it was such a well-crafted system. I do miss the lens options for that camera at times, but I think the colors straight out of the camera with the JPEGs with Fuji are a sight to behold. But if you mainly shoot RAW and you love natural color profiles, I think the GX9 is probably the way to go. But I feel like it does not necessarily evoke the same type of artistic emotions within you as the Fuji does. Honestly, I don't feel like there's any discernible shortcomings, but one thing I do wish the camera had is IBIS, and I think that the camera would have been truly complete with that. And it's not only for video, but also for stills. With certain cameras, you can take photos all the way down to 1/15th of a shutter without too much motion blur. I know the GX9 has in-body image stabilization, and the camera is almost the same size as the X100V. I hope the next X100 iteration gets IBIS. It would make it a perfect camera. This has been the most hyped camera without a doubt for the past couple of years, and I'm actually glad it was, because I would not have known about the wonders of Fuji. The downside of such a hype is obviously that the prices have gone through the roof. but more importantly, you can't even get it. With that said, there's something magical about the X100V. The overall aesthetics appeal is through the roof, and they have removed any obstacles in you not taking this camera with you every time you go out of the door. I just love how the Viewfinder's design fusions into the body, and every element seems to have the right color, tone, and feel to them. There's so much emphasis on the beauty of the camera, and it is a shallow way of looking at photography. We only should be focusing on the quality of the photos. An object makes you engage with the product more, and the likelihood of you improving as a photographer is a lot higher as well. But let's just think about it. It has inbuilt flash, ND filter, different viewfinder modes, great autofocus, the best JPEG colors on the market. It's hard to justify not using the camera in any given situation. Can I recommend this camera? Definitely. But at these prices, I honestly would go with something like the X-T4 with the 23mm 2.0 or a Pancake 27mm 2.8 to start your collection of Fuji APS-C lenses. It's still expensive, but it would be right around the same price, and you would attain great video capabilities with the X-T4. Or I think an X-T4 with a 27mm 2.8 would be ideal as well. But it's also hard to get, so I don't know. I know I'm just reiterating here, but for the best 35mm experience, the X100V is the best way to go. I might sell it mainly because I lack funds and I just acquired the X-H2S. And I have a bunch of Fuji lenses for the APS-C systems and also acquired the X-T4, so I might keep the X-T4 and the X-H2S as my two main cameras. But again, if I had the funds and I'm only interested in photography, the Fujifilm X100V is the absolute best.